Okay, so a couple weeks ago I made a video talking about plot lines and how some have been kind of left in the air, and they've finally kind of mentioned the fact that they do that. They've said that, we introduce characters and stories that, kind of hang for a while, and, it's just, they need to find the right time to kind of bring those characters or bring those stories back. So what I thought we'd do is take a look at the more kind of modern plot lines that have been kind of left in the air. Now I do say modern because there is a few that date back, longer than the more current Resident Evil games, and I think they're more worthy of a bigger video kind of individually. And there's one in here as well that I'm going to mention that, again, I have a main video about, because it's a bit more kind of involved and convoluted, and it wouldn't really explain it all if I just kind of mention it in a video kind of overlapping each one. So that's getting its own as well. So let's start with probably the most interesting one, but also the most obscure one at the minute, and that is the Blue Umbrella storyline. So this is a story that's kind of brought pretty much exclusively in Resident Evil 7. So throughout the game you find kind of notes, pictures of a helicopter with the Umbrella logo on it. Obviously it's the new blue version. And then later on, a team of soldiers sent by this Blue Umbrella company arrives, led by Chris. Now obviously the Chris in Resident Evil 7 did get a redesign. There was a theory when 7 came out that it wasn't Chris, that it was somebody else using his name. It is. They just kind of changed his model. People didn't really like it, so they changed it kind of again in Village to kind of closer match the last time you kind of saw him in a game, which was Resident Evil 6. So it's definitely Chris. And kind of the story we have of Blue Umbrella is more so mentioned in Chris's DLC for 7, the Not Hero DLC. And it does basically say that, the company's kind of been reorganized, it's been kind of rebuilt, and it's kind of a company now that is not dismissing the things the old version did, but rather kind of owning up to it and, trying to make amends for it. So hence why they sent in soldiers to deal with the Evelyn situation in Resident Evil 7. What other kind of tidbits we have on it is obviously, again, through the Chris DLC, is that he's not really completely on board with it, obviously, understandably so. He's kind of been following Umbrella for years now. So having them kind of come back in this new fashion, it's not completely agreeing with it or even buying it for a moment. I think, that's pretty much all the information we have, and there's a slight nod to it in Village. It could be nothing, but the literal small detail you get in Village to do with them is that the med injectors that Chris uses in his section of the game have the logo on it. So, they're still using Umbrella equipment, and that could just be an asset that they're using for the healing, but it's very prominent on the healing injectors, so they're still using tech that is kind of being given to them by this new Umbrella. So who knows, but it's kind of been left in the open. And I think now with Requiem kind of going back to Raccoon City and one of the villains in the game being tied to the original Umbrella, I really feel like now is the time to kind of reintroduce that kind of side of it and maybe explain it a bit more, because that is, in a way, it's such a small storyline that we know of at the minute, but it's such a huge deal for pretty much a big portion of the franchise as a whole. For most of the games, they're the bad guys. Obviously the newer games have had these individual characters or these newer kind of companies that have turned up, but for a large portion of the games, Umbrella's the bad guy, and to bring them back in what seems like a good guy redemption arc kind of style and leaving it there is an interesting idea. Carrying on with Resident Evil 7 though, we have the connection. So this is one that I definitely think is going to be involved in Requiem in some way. It was such a big thing through 7 and 8, so to kind of leave it there would be a big letdown. So what we do know is they're kind of black market bioweapon dealers, right? They are not a big company like Umbrella, they're not organized or anything like that. It's just a black market group. Also ran by Brandon Bailey, who was a big name in the original Umbrella. So yeah, big ties straight away. Obviously they're kind of under the radar at the minute. They very much did kind of influence a lot of the story in 7 and 8. Lucas was in contact with them. They worked with Miranda to obviously try and make Evelyn, which didn't work, hence why Rose is so important in the next game. They're a big deal, and I think, with Victor Gideon being a previous member of Umbrella, and Umbrella obviously kind of being nothing at this point, that he's got to be getting some kind of resources or something from somewhere, right? So I do genuinely feel that the connections are going to be involved in Resident Evil 9 in some way or another. I'm hoping I'm right anyway. If I'm wrong and they're not mentioned again, I'll kind of be pretty miffed. But I do feel like, now's the time to kind of bring those people more into the light, because it's such a background story at the moment. So yeah, here's hoping that they're kind of fully, properly introduced in some way with this game. And then, jumping forward to Village, there's two very big ones. I think one is very problematic, and again, I'm going to briefly mention it here and have a bigger video talking about it soon. But the big one that isn't so problematic is the BSAA and Chris. So obviously, big cliffhanger at the end of Village with the bioweapons being used for the BSAA. Now, anyone who doesn't know necessarily all the kind of the background of it, I'll briefly cover it now, but I'm sure most people do. So the BSAA was set up to kind of be a biosecurity team, right? If there was kind of any traces or rumours or activity of bioterrorism anywhere in the world, they would go and deal with it. You kind of play as Chris while he's working for them in Resident Evil 5, obviously. Revelations games, also they're in there too, I think the first one, if I'm remembering correctly. So yeah, they fight, bioterrorism, and the reveal at the end of Village is obviously that they're now using bioweapons to fight bioweapons, and that's kind of against the whole idea of the group. And I think you definitely see it impact Chris more. He's one of the original members of the group, so he's understandably pretty pissed, and it ends with him wanting to go directly to BSAA headquarters and kind of confront them about it, and that is literally it. It's a storyline that's massive, and I think it shouldn't be, if they decided to make more kind of spin-off games or kind of bridge games like Revelations, it is not a game that should fit into a game like that. It should be a mainline entry storyline. It affects so many characters that are very popular within the franchise. Obviously, pretty much everyone from Stars that's still alive. Obviously, Jill, Chris, Rebecca, Barry, those people are involved with the BSAA in some way or another. I was always hoping that was going to be the big story in Resident Evil 9, but it isn't, so we just got to wait a little bit longer for that one. And then moving on to the final kind of story point that's a bit more complicated is Rose Winters. Okay, so this one, again, I'm going to make a whole video on this, so it's going to be a brief kind of summary of why it may not necessarily be the easiest thing to bring back. But so we have the end credit scene for Village, right, where she goes to visit Ethan's grave, and she's obviously grown up at this point, and then some kind of military folk come to pick her up, right? She kind of gets teased by one of them and threatens one of them, saying that she can do stuff that Chris doesn't know she's capable of doing. If you didn't know, if you haven't played the Rose DLC, she does have powers, right? That's already kind of a bit of a oof with a Resident Evil character. She's got full-on powers, right? So the game kind of ends on that scene. There's a weird thing that happens in that cutscene where, as the car's driving away, someone's walking towards it and it stops, and that's how the game ends. That still isn't necessarily clear on what that is. I think there was some kind of shenanigans with being able to free cam the cutscene, and it is Ethan's model, but I think that might just be a placeholder thing, because obviously you're not really supposed to be able to see that far. But either way, it's an interesting little tidbit. But the main thing is two things, and I will cover these more in depth in a video later on. And one of them being, obviously the fact that she's got powers. I briefly mentioned that a minute ago, but obviously the big one I always feel like is the timeline issue. As you know, the Resident Evil games, especially nowadays, try and always release in the year they are set to release in, or around it. And we now know, through playing the DLC, that there is no weird rapid aging shenanigans with Rose. It's been as long as it should have been, and that kind of leaves characters and events that are happening with 9 to have already concluded by the time that Rose is playable in her DLC at that point. it's interesting. So I will make a video covering that more in depth soon. But that's pretty much it. Leave your thoughts on these kind of plot lines in the comments. Which one do you want to see come back? Which one do you think was more likely to come back? Or any thoughts on what you think they should do with them in the future? Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one.